Student protests against the war in Gaza have spread to universities across the United States. Several colleges have closed off campuses and switched to remote learning. Some universities called in police to break up protest camps. Hundreds have been arrested since last week. Administrators fear the sit-ins could stoke anti-Semitism, but the students say they're defending free speech.
Another day, another round of pro-Gaza demonstrations at Columbia's New York campus. As the protests enter their 7th day, charges of anti-Semitism are causing a political crisis, with calls for the college's president to resign. Over 130 people were arrested on Monday evening at a protest organised by NYU students. The mayor of New York said hate has no place in the city.
This is the New York City Police Department.
I know what it is to march the streets. I know what it is to protect protesters as the police officers. This is a different energy that I'm seeing.
But the movement is spreading beyond the streets of Manhattan, with encampments now occupying college campuses across the United States.
I'm one of the organizers leading MIT Jews for Ceasefire, and we're out here joining in this encampment because we know as Jewish people our liberation and our safety is tied up in the safety of the Palestinians, and it's day 199 of genocide, and that's far past the line.
The main demand of protesters is for colleges to divest economic ties to Israel over its handling of the Gaza war, and with any companies involved in the production of weapons.
So the divestment campaign is basically, our demands are to divest the University of Minnesota from weapons manufacturing companies that bomb places, that create weapons that bomb places like Yemen, Palestine, Gaza to be specific, and all other countries around the globe.
House Speaker Mike Johnson is set to visit Columbia on Wednesday to address what his office called the rise of virulent anti-Semitism. But politicians beginning to weigh into the debate in a febrile election year seems an unlikely intervention to cool the rhetoric.
Let's get the latest from our Washington correspondent, Benjamin Alvarez Gruber, joining me now. Benjamin, university administration's really in the spotlight here, with some even deciding to call in police to detain protesters. What can you tell us?
That's right. Some universities like Columbia or NYU, New York University, have taken that decision. Schools are told to send communications if they want NYPD, the New York Police Department, to come in. That's what the mayor, Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, said earlier today at a press conference. He stressed that that's the procedure for private property and that it's different with what NYPD does on the streets for those who are protesting outside of the universities. And that's something that we have been seeing, because they're not just protests within the universities, but also supporters who gather outside of the gates of the university to support the students that are setting up this encampment at Columbia University, the students that protested, and they said that they will keep the so-called Gaza Solidarity encampment until the university divests from companies with ties to Israel. Last weekend on Sunday, I was there. I covered this encampment there. It's a small time frame that we journalists get to campus grounds, and there were flyers that were handed out stating that they would remain until the university divests all finances. So we have to see how that develops and what the steps that the university president and all those on management will take now will look like in the next couple of days.
And Benjamin, give us a little context here. How do these protests against the war in Gaza play into long-running debates on U.S. campuses about free speech?
Long-running debates indeed, and the debate over free speech is ongoing as we see more universities joining the protest, not just at Columbia, where faculty members even joined students for a walkout yesterday, but also in other schools that are seeing their own protests or their own encampments now. NYU, the University of Michigan, MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Yale, to give you just a few examples. And the president of Columbia University said she was deeply saddened by the situation on campus, and she said that we cannot allow one group to dictate the terms and attempts to disrupt important milestones like a graduation. And that's something that the protesters have also said that they will continue pushing in those encampments. And even the White House weighed in on this discussion, stressing that there is a right to peaceful protest in the US, but the calls for violence and physical intimidation targeting Jewish students and the Jewish community are anti-Semitic and dangerous and have absolutely no place on any college campuses or anywhere in this country.
Benjamin, thank you for that update. That is DW's Benjamin Alvarez Gruber in Washington, D.C. Now, the protests gripping U.S. college campuses are just the latest example of how the war in Gaza is inflaming public opinion in countries around the world. In the U.S., those divisions are being watched especially closely in this election year. Some pundits are even saying that President Joe Biden's position, which is unpopular among many Democratic voters, could cost him the election.
The United States has historically been a strong supporter of Israel. It was the first to recognize the state when it was founded in 1948. However, the high number of civilian deaths in the war in Gaza has sparked a heated debate and fueled a shift in public opinion.
I don't like people to even call it Israel. I'd rather call it Netanyahu and his cronies. Because I'm sure there are a lot of good people in Israel.
I'm on no team, but just for it to end, yeah.
I think it's the U.S.'s job to encourage there to be a ceasefire over there and stop supporting the war and sending weapons and stuff over there.
I just disagree with them. I don't think it's the right position to take. Hamas is just going to attack them again.
Yeah, I mean, with TikTok and Instagram, we get a lot of first-hand accounts of everything that's happening, so we don't have to rely on just the news to give us the information.
The media plays a significant role in shaping public opinion. Sarah Allison from the Washington Post, a media expert, explains how various media outlets are discussing the war.
At the outset, most of the American coverage on mainstream television outlets was really focused on the original attack. Over time, we've seen, as the Israeli assault on Gaza has gone on for months and months, there's more attention across all platforms on the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and the civilian casualties. What we've seen in polling is that there's a real generational divide now that is opening up. And older Americans, people who have an actual memory of the Holocaust or whose parents were involved in the Holocaust, still feel a real commitment and a real obligation to support Israel. Younger generations have only known a strong Israel and an Israel who wins wars. The current trend continues. It stands to reason that that will decrease over time.
The Gaza conflict has also exposed divisions within the political landscape, especially within the Democratic Party. While 51% of Democrats say Israel has gone too far, only 11% of Republicans agree. 38% of Democrats are in support to reducing aid for Israel, while only 10% of Republicans want this reduction. If President Biden doesn't soon find a way to push Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to do more to minimize civilian casualties, the Israeli bombardment of Gaza could very likely cost him his re-election, potentially bringing a president back to the White House for whom suffering in Gaza may mean even less for his unwavering support for Israel.
Let's get across to Washington, D.C. for some perspective and speak to U.S. politics analyst Liz Schuelke. Liz, welcome. On Monday, Joe Biden made his first public remarks on these protests across college campuses across the United States. In this very sensitive political moment, we heard him calling them anti-Semitic. Is that the reaction that you would expect from the U.S. president?
Joe Biden has been incredibly strong on supporting Israel, on keeping a watchful eye on protests and calling out where it is anti-Semitic. So having known some of President Biden's past reactions to this, I'm not at all surprised he called this out. There is a lot of footage and a lot of information still coming out of these protests. So I think it is a very complex situation. But if he's saying that he's seeing that, I'm not surprised he would call it out where he sees it.
Now, we've said that this is causing divisions within the Democratic Party, the issue of Israel's war in Gaza. When the Democrats are looking ahead to November, what are they thinking in terms of strategy in how to approach these campus protests?
Absolutely. I mean, everything at this point is pivoting towards November. I think there's going to be a huge question within the Democratic Party. One, they do not want a heated, contested convention in the late summer, early fall, which there's been a lot of parallels drawn to 1968 already, which was a very heated convention for the Democrats and ended up losing them the presidency. They need to go into the fall unified. That balance of how do we unify needs to be also with who's actually coming out and voting for us, who's getting folks to the polls, and what are the other really huge issues at stake here. Biden has hammered time and time again, rights on women is central to his strategy. Just today, he announced a huge push on climate change. He has done more than almost any other president on addressing climate change, on addressing investment in infrastructure. So he's going to have this real tricky balance of, yes, we need to talk about the divisions within the party. We need to take seriously folks that are willing to get out their door and protest, while also understanding there is a lot outside of this one issue at stake with this election.
So you have these major issues which will certainly play a huge role in the elections. Climate change, immigration is another one, of course. I'm curious, though, how much generally foreign policy issues typically weigh on the minds of U.S. voters when they go to the polls.
I'm someone who's passionate about foreign policy, passionate about the transatlantic alliance, and it breaks my heart a little bit to say every time the presidential comes around, it is not ever a top issue for voters. Voters, first and foremost, always think with their pocketbooks. How does the economy feel? How do their salaries feel? How does the cost of living feel? And then we've seen a real push since 2020, 2018 of women. You know, we're seeing women switch sides. We're seeing women for the first time voting because of the attacks on women. And these tend to trump, for lack of a better word, foreign policy. So I think there is a chance this is such a particular tinderbox of voter engagement around this specific issue. But I'm never too hopeful that foreign policy and understanding the nuances of foreign policy are ever that much of a sway on American voters.
Do you think this is an issue that could die down by the time November rolls around? And just to follow up a little bit, I mean, this clearly has been an issue that's ignited passions. Do you think that Biden has done enough to convince voters within his party who are seriously worried about the plight of the Palestinians?
That's a couple-part question. And again, it gets to, has he done enough to convince them he's taking it seriously? He has. He's called for an immediate ceasefire, which was one of the initial early pushes. He's had continued intense conversations with Netanyahu about where red lines are, about focusing on humanitarian approaches, reducing civilian casualties. What he really needs to convince is voters that they should get out and vote, that it is important to continue voting for him. I think the biggest issue to this election for him to be voter apathy. And how do you make sure that they're going to stick with him, even though that this is a hard time, understanding he's still working on it and it's worth investing in another 4 years.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. That is Liz Schuelke in Washington, D.C.